What is up, heavy metallurgy, heavy metal experts? My name is Brainsmasher, and I'm here today with an album review. We're going to be talking about Norway's Dodheimsgard and their new album, Black Medium Current. This album was out on April 14th by Peaceville Records. You can get it on every format imaginable at the link down below. Now, if you're curious, I have written a review, a lengthy review, extensively intellectually stimulating review on Invisible Oranges. And if you look down there somewhere in the mess, you might find a link to read that, to hear my thoughts on it on paper. This is going to be just you and me shooting the breeze kind of review, talking about an album that has melted my mind over and over. So this is all I've been listening to for 2 or 3 months now. Let's rewind a little bit. If you're not familiar, Dodheimsgard were a Norwegian black metal band starting out in 1993, and they were really avant-garde at the beginning of their career, but they've gotten way weirder over the course of their several albums in 28 years or so. And so over the course of their career, they've really presented their listeners and the black metal world in general with a lot of challenges in each time they come out with a new album. And I've always felt like Dodheimsgard were one of my favorite artists and bands to follow because of that challenge. The reward of an album that is thoroughly engaging and sometimes enthralling is such because of the challenge that it takes to overcome what you know and what you think and what you desire out of an album to get to an album that you wind up growing to love. And that, I think, is one of the most rewarding relationships that you can have with a band over the course of their lengthy discography. So if Dodheimsgard has maybe scared you away, or if you've just kind of lost interest in the band at some point in their discography, I think now is a really good time to give them another shot. Black Medium Current, it does a lot of going back to mid-90s black metal. There's moments where you'll certainly find parts that are similar to Transylvanian Hunger or Ulver's Bergtat. And I think they intentionally kind of did that stylistically to get you to be able to accept some of their more weird moments. And so this album is kind of different in a lot of ways, but one of them is that it both moves forward and backward at the same time. And in some ways that was kind of a challenge for me because I was like, I don't really want to hear one of the strangest bands, the avant-garde artists at the forefront of, progressive black metal, do any going back and referencing anything from their yesteryears. But I found that actually was a really interesting dichotomy between the old style and the new style. And the genius of Black Medium Current is finding how those moments can evolve into one another. The transitional moments from so many different styles on Black Medium Current is like something I've never heard before. It's been getting a ton of great reviews. It seems like everybody who's already a Dodheimsgard fan is thoroughly in love with it, myself included for sure. But I think there are a lot of people who are paying attention to this album because everybody's just raving about this thing. It is phenomenal. It's not just a great Dodheimsgard album. It's not just a Norweird album. It breaks a lot of barriers, and there are even it borrows from so many different styles, both metal and definitely outside of metal. There's some like Peter Gabriel moments here and there. it really pulls from all different directions in such a comfortable and cohesive style that only Dodheimsgard could achieve. So the album kind of starts off unassumingly. There's kind of like a lowly flute kind of playing, and it kind of drifts into this sort of mid-pace sort of black metal kind of style. And you're like, okay, I can see where this is. I get this, you know. But it's slowly, like, as the chording starts to kind of become apparent, you start to understand that this is not as normal as something you may have assumed it was. And as the album kind of further evolves very slowly and very comfortably, it makes those weird moments a lot less challenging, I think. And ordinarily, I guess I would have preferred, I think, said in the past, I would have preferred that their presentation of the more weird moments would have been more brutal or like a slap to the face. But I really find that there's a lot more complexity and I think emotional depth to the album because of how it slowly presents itself and how it kind of has this exchange of like, okay, here's a fairly normal black metal moment that you may be already familiar with, and we're going to slowly turn it into something that is beautiful and grotesque and just mind-melting. And the way that you see those transitional moments occur is just so fascinating to me. I don't think I really can't come up with any references or comparisons for another artist or band who has done something like that before. And that's really the core of how this album, to me, comes across as a completely new idea or style. I've been really struggling to put words to how different and unique and new what Black Medium Current feels. So the album starts off unassumingly, like I said, kind of black metal, and it lulls you into these kind of weirder parts. So there's several songs, I think, where the songs will kind of start off like, okay, I get this, I know this is going on. And you'll find those quick changes are so clever and so comfortable. But as the album progresses, it definitely gets more and more intense and bizarre. It's a 69-minute listen. Nice. And it's such a world to visit. So most of the songs are between about 8 and 12 minutes. And the apex of the album is track 7, where some of the more familiar kind of Vicotnik riffing style is really, really fast and really, really present, and it gets just incredibly manic, and then it just bursts out into space. It's such a visual album, I gotta say. The album cover depicts kind of an outer space scene where the colors of the rainbow are kind of broken apart. I'm not sure I really understand the concept of the cover, but it really is a spacious album. It's a headphone album where if you sit in a dark room and listen to this album on headphones, you will be transported to a dimension that you have never even fathomed before. And that might sound kind of scary. I get it. Space is scary, right? But Dodheimsgard's wizardry in this album is that it makes that spaciousness and that transportive feature of the record so alluring and so comforting. And that is another thing about Black Medium Current that is just completely unique to me. And that's what's been just fascinating about the whole album. So one of the more remarkable features of the record is that this is mostly a whole new band. Vicotnik is the only remaining member, and since the last album, Umbro Omega, there's been a whole new change in the ranks. So Aldrin, the formerly really notable vocalist, has stepped out of the vocal booth, and I think this is the first time Vicotnik has been the main singer of the band. And he not only replaces Vicotnik so confidently, it's a very different thing. Like, I feel like doing something that is wild and creative and inventive is exactly what Dodheimsgard would require a vocalist to be, but he doesn't do anything that sounds anything like Aldrun. And I think that's like in honor of his past achievements as a vocalist. But Vicotnik stepping in as a vocalist it's refreshing. It's insane the ideas this guy has come up with in the vocal booth. There's a lot of things that I've never heard before. There's kind of like two different disparate voices, some of them really, wild and manic and screaming out and kind of emotional wreckage. But in harmony, in kind of disharmony in some ways, meandering with another vocal track that sings the lyrics along with one another. But it's so interesting to hear these two different voices singing the same words, and it creates this just really kind of tense emotional depth to the album, and that's something I've never heard a vocalist pull off. To the Ontario and the Black Whale. There's times where there's just a single vocal performance going on, but I really found a lot of fascination with the points in the album where there's two different voices going on, just kind of playing off one another and doing the same thing sometimes and doing completely different things at the different times. But the lyrics are usually scaffolded at the same points with one another. The vocal performance is something that's the most interesting vocal performance I've heard in metal in many, many, many years. The other players in the band, of course, are pivotal to making this record what it is. The new drummer, Mirvol, holy crap, this guy is talented. And I think some of the percussive references that he's bringing to these songs are what make those transitions from part to part so comfortable. I think there's points where he kind of starts to reference that a change is about to occur and gives you kind of a little bit of a preview of what you're about to hear, so that when those kind of jarring changes happen, they're more consumable and more appealing in retrospect. Overall, the album has so many memorable parts. I've been listening to this album quite a bit, but it's been a long time since an album came across my ears that I've been able to pick up and memorize part for part, because it's so enigmatic and memorable and catchy. The music has a lot of depth to it and a lot of thematic melodicism. I wouldn't say it's a highly melodic album. There's not necessarily a lot of musical complexity to it, but the complexity and the depth that you'll find on Black Medium Current is because the studio wizardry and mastering and mixing just makes the sounds all vast and huge sounding. And there's a lot of different instrumentation going on. There's a lot of like church bells going on. There's flutes. There's tons of different instruments, but it doesn't sound like a jumbled mess. All of the instrumentation sounds really, really logical to achieve these different ideas. There's little stylistic things peppered in that I think maybe a more unassuming listener would call industrial or techno or pop or martial industrial or something. But I think those are really just little bit of aesthetic kind of parallels to those genres. I wouldn't say that there's really any of those genres wholly peppered in here. There's moments that sound electronic and use electronic percussion and sound kind of like maybe some 80s pop kind of moments. There's even a moment where it sounds exactly like the Knight Rider theme song. But all in all, I think what Dodheimsgard has been amazing at, and especially on Black Medium Current, is just taking all these tons of different wild ideas that don't seem like they should make sense and mesh them together into an amazing listening experience and making those jarring different things sound like they just make perfect sense. It's like the alchemy of a perfect food, combining tons of different ingredients and flavors that just contrast one another so wonderfully, and it's just so mind-blowing of an album. stark contrast to the rest of the band's discography, Black Medium Current definitely has a more sorrowful and mournful kind of sadness to it all. And that's especially propelled by Vicotnik's vocal performance. And I think that some of that kind of borrows upon some of the styles that Satanic Art began with. The piano sort of melancholic, sort of longing sort of voice that we've heard throughout the last couple of albums. And I think Umbro Omega kind of elevated that to a higher degree. But here it just takes on such a more realistic and emotional impact that I certainly wasn't expecting from Dodheimsgard. It's not often these days, honestly, that I connect emotionally with an album, but Black Medium Current is something that has really given me a lot of comfort because it goes to a dark place that is somewhat familiar and illustrates it in such a elaborate and newly creative way. I was not expecting Dodheimsgard to give me something that would take me to a place that I was familiar with, some amount of darkness and some sorrow, and illustrate that in a way that I was really eager to come back to over and over and over again. And I think that's really where the value of an album that has an emotional element to it comes in, is that if you need to have that emotional connection with an artist or a band or a song, you can go there, and in a way it kind of relieves you of that sorrow or that darkness that you're looking to kind of get away from. At least that's how I connect with an album like this. And for me, that's one of the most important reasons that I listen to music. So there have been a couple of singles from the album, and I'm certainly recommending that you check those out. There's a couple of videos on YouTube, some animated lyric videos and stuff. But if you aren't immediately turned away, I highly recommend listening to the entire album from front to back. That is really a wholly different experience. This isn't an album that you would just throw on while you're hanging out with friends or barbecuing with your buddies. This is an emotionally engaging and intense album, and it's beautiful. And if you miss any moment of it, and if you don't focus on it entirely, you're missing out on a lot of nuance and depth that it has to it that a lot of other albums really fall short on. So I highly recommend picking up a copy of this album, or just give it a stream and sit in a dark room, listen to it on headphones, and you will be taken so far away from humanity, and you will be worshiping at the altar of Dodheimsgard like I have been for about 25 years now. I've been a fan of this band for a long time, and I am always eagerly awaiting whatever they do next because they're fascinating. And so this latest iteration of Dodheimsgard, I can't believe it. I honestly didn't expect this album to be so good. So, if you hold me against the wall, I would rate this album a 10 out of 10. I've got no problem saying this will most likely be my album of the year. I haven't liked an album this much in many years, and I would not change a single thing about it. So, you're going to listen to it now that I've given you my all about it. Check out Black Medium Current from Dodheimsgard, and if you like hearing me talk about metal music, you're going to want to hit that subscribe button down there to the Brainsmasher channel. Subscribe to me on YouTube, and we'll hang out. We'll do more of this. So thanks for watching this. Pick up this album, give it a listen, and I will see you next time. As if my review is not enough for you, I and a couple of my friends at Invisible Oranges recently did a podcast with Vicotnik talking about Black Medium Current, and I'll put a link down there below for you to check that out. It's super fascinating. Vicotnik is such a friendly and open, candid artist. Please listen to it.